Welcome, everybody. And thank you for you guys for joining me here. Just something that I thought, well, let me tell you a little bit about my friends and panelists here. Doris is the CEO and founder of Mother Films. She spent 25 years at HBO. She's an executive producer, and she's an activist for social justice and liberal causes. And she teaches at NYU. Easmanie, in the fabulous pants, is the director of artist programs and finance at NYWIFT, where she oversees their fiscal sponsorship program, which we're going to talk a little bit about later. And she is a producer and an award-winning writer. And she has her master's in cinema studies from NYU. Aaron is a partner, and I will tell you, a super lawyer. And that's just not my opinion. I mean, he was actually named super lawyer at Pierce and Kwok, and is experienced in many industries and legal issues, but has a particular focus on the entertainment industry, which is why it's great that he's here today. He did not go to NYU and does not teach at NYU, but I went through all of his degrees and where he's passed the bar and all of the representations that he does in the industry. And it would take so long to read them all to you that it would take up this entire session. So we're going to give him a pass on the NYU thing. And did I mention that I teach at NYU? I thought, because that's important here. Joyce, who I've known for many years, is an award-winning producer, and she is the CEO of Pierpoline Films. She also chairs BAFTA North America, which is a big deal. She knows a lot about financing independent films, and she did not go to NYU either because they don't have one in France, which is where she spent a lot of her time. So that's my panel. We're glad to be here today. So we're talking about financing and storytelling and how the two are connected and how they drive decision making. So I do want to say I think of the 90s as being like the golden age, and I'm assuming everybody in this room pretty much is an independent filmmaker, right? I mean that's pretty fair. And our golden age, I think, was the 90s, even going into the early aughts. Every studio had a specialty label. Disney had Miramax, Paramount had Paramount Classics, Universal had Focus Features, and so on and so on. And everybody was really excited about not only acquiring independent film, but also financing independent film and distributing it. And they were making a lot of movies at one time. I mean, I remember when I was at Miramax and I was overseeing production finance, there was a day when I had 34 movies in various stages of production and post-production. My counterpart at Disney had 16, and the guy had 3 times the size staff that I had. But we were making all this stuff, and we didn't know if it was going to work. They were all really unique individual stories. They were all low budget, and it was kind of like throwing a whole different kind, lots of different kinds of pasta at the wall to see what stuck, and we were willing to take that risk. And also at the same time, in the indie financing world, private equity investors had play money, and I experienced this personally, like up until 2008. When the market collapsed. Before then, you could find private equity anywhere and everywhere. And they had play money, and they thought it was fun. Let's invest in a movie. And it was really easy, I think, at least a lot easier back then, to raise private equity for little independent films. And then the market collapsed. And I couldn't raise a dime in equity in 2008, 2009. I could not raise a dime. So I shifted my focus a little bit and started focusing on tax credits, because that seemed to be the low-hanging fruit. It seemed like even in this economy, this horrible economy, jurisdictions were passing tax credits to incentivize people to come to those places to spend money and create jobs. And so I shifted my business a little bit to focus on that. Now as an independent producer, that's the first thing I look at once I have a budget for a film. Excuse me. Excuse me. That's the first thing I look at. It's okay, where am I going to make this film for the least amount of money, or at least get the biggest bang for my buck back? So I want to start with Joyce. Original stories now, I mean, so many of your films, they're independent films, financed with private equity, right? Most of them?
All of the films I've done have been financed with private equity.
So there are so many, I just feel like it's really hard to get people to pay attention to us now, right? Because everybody's concerned about ROI, and they're concerned about, those people that were just passionate about throwing their private equity into movies that they cared about, now care more about ROI, right?
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit about your personal experience today versus, years ago.
Well, I mean, look, it's always difficult to get people to give you money to make a film because it's kind of like a crapshoot with the independent filmmaking. Some can really hit it big, and some can fall flat, and you don't know. But I think when you have original stories, and you keep fighting. But one of the key parts of I think doing independent films is keeping it at a reasonable budget level and finding soft monies in order to offset the budget. I mean, you've got to find all the different ways that you can make it much more fiscally responsible and try and keep, the budget as low as possible.
So, yes, I completely agree with you. But let's talk about narratives too, right? So, the choices, the creative choices that people are making, how is that affecting, if any, who's going to write a check?
Well, I mean...
Right? I mean, because I'm thinking, so I'm out there trying to raise money for 3 movies right now, and one of them, subject matter is kind of difficult, And Doris, we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but the subject matter is not that easy, right? And so people are taking a pass.
I think the political situation has really influenced what's going on right now within the last year or two. And so because of the volatility in the general marketplace and in everything that's going on, I think that is what's affecting us. The money is still there. It's just trying to find the right people who are comfortable putting it into film. So, we've had this situation before with the volatility in the marketplace, and I think now we're really seeing that's what's making it so difficult. But, in order to get through this, I think, it's finding those original stories and an original talent out there, because you want to make something that's just a little bit different so that people will notice it. You can't be making the same old, films and all of the franchises. I mean, yes, that's what the studios want to do, but you can really make a name for yourself and really make a place in the market with small independent films that are original.
So, Doris, because we were talking earlier, right? And you when you look at your portfolio of films, right? Like a lot of them are political in nature, right? And
yes, I mean, we're not talking about my HBO experience where I was buying films. I was curating and buying and paying for films and going to festivals, and being a buyer is really cool. when I left, I worked on helping to sell 2 documentaries. One was called A Most Beautiful Thing, about the first all-black rowing team out of Chicago of teenagers, and it was really beautiful. And for me, it was also specifically important because I feel like men are just not given. There are a lot of audiences that people don't think about as underserved. I think young men, in a different way than superhero movies, are underserved. I think men seen as heroic for simply surviving and living and providing jobs and providing for their families are underserved. I think that kind of thing is underserved, right? The other movie was called The Surge, which was about the surge of female candidates in the midterms in 2018. All of these films were financed by private equity. I stepped in for a legendary Broadway actress friend of mine named Tanya Pinkins when she wanted to make her she loves horror movies. She wanted to make a movie called Red Pill, which was essentially if white supremacy won, right? It was horrible. I mean, horrible in its, right? But she and I both were very scared, and we thought this is what was actually happening, and I wrote her a little check. So when you ask how are these movies going to get financed, they get financed privately, period. I made a short film called Fuck 'Em Right Back, which is a hip-hop comedy, and I made it for the artist, as you say. I met this artist who had never been in a television show or a film in his life, and I thought he was a genius, and I used my own money for a short, and I was right. He's incredible. 3 different companies came to us wanting to make a series about it, and it premiered at Sundance 2022. And by the time we were really out in the market, then there was a strike. And that at the end of that, at the end of the strike, people were suffering so much. First of all, the company, which was led by 2 very famous female producers in Hollywood, they shut down the company because things were getting so hard. And I don't want to say her name, but she's a very famous executive and producer, said to me, I love your project so much, but it's about a black, queer, plus-size guy as a romantic lead. It's not going to work. If you don't have IP, if you don't have proven this, if you don't have proven that, it's not going to work. So where I am now is I have taken a step back with him to say, okay, what is the story we really want to tell? Let's make it small. Let's make it ourselves. And that's the way it is. But I think in the meantime, I was listening to you talk about the 90s and the aughts. There are two trends that I wanted to point out. One was it's almost been replaced by the indie horror film world. Like, oh, we'll all take chances on horror. We'll all take chances on horror. I went to a Vassar undergrad with Jason Blum, dear friend of mine, amazing guy. His formula works. Why? Because he keeps the budget absolutely sacrosanct and then gives the artistic power to the artist. But he's doing singles and doubles, and some will work and some will not, and he will not. And his genius is that he doesn't go above those budgets. That's it. It works. But then, like, I happen to be on the board of a film funding company, and everybody wants horror movies because they just think, oh, the ROI, the ROI, the ROI. So that's one thing that is, it's like IP or cheap horror. You know, that's a kind of these trends. And the other trend that I came to see, because I bought every kind of movie, and I bought hundreds of documentaries, and I sold those 2 documentaries. But I watched documentaries go from what a documentary is supposed to be, a document about history, a story, a thing, to a kind of infotainment where, you know, now it's almost impossible to sell a documentary about a small original story versus if it's not about a huge sports star or or like a story that everybody already knows, that has a pre-sold element, that is about, Formula One or, whatever. And so I think there's this kind of way that people want to be safe, that has really hurt, I think, the industry and audiences. So, and that's politics as well as just the way the industry has kind of lost so much money, so many jobs, so much this, that nobody wants to, not nobody, but people aren't taking chances. When if you look at HBO, their success was all with completely original shows that nobody else would have done. And if I were giving advice to these people, I'd say, do the most original thing you can do with and start there, because that's really what gave HBO its edge, its success, and the fact that you always knew what an HBO show was,
Right. I don't want to completely dwell on the political climate, but Easmanie, I gotta ask you, right? Because you run a fiscal sponsor program, okay?
Yes.
So as I said, I'm producing 3 films right now, and on all 3 of them, I decided to look for a fiscal sponsor, right? Because I've got one project where the script's not even written yet, but we're negotiating the life rights and book rights for this story. And then there's another project that's a documentary that has a huge educational component to it. And another is a narrative feature. But I decided that I want to raise some foundational grant money, right? So I went out looking for a fiscal sponsor on each one of them. On one project, it's a Civil War drama, okay? But it's when you look at this story, it seems very contemporary and relevant today through the prism of red state versus blue state. I can't explain it, but I've gotten turned down by fiscal sponsors, right? And some of them have actually taken a very particular interest in knowing who I was going to reach out to for financing, for grant money. No one's ever asked me that before. No, other fiscal sponsors have never said, well, who are you going to ask? And then we'll tell you whether we're going to be your sponsor. This was, and so I had a couple of rejections with no real compelling reason why they said no. But again, the story it's political, right? So my question to you is, have things shifted now, and content is now an element of consideration when fiscal sponsors are making their determination?
Not for New York Women in Film and Television. Our fiscal sponsorship program is really a membership. If you're a member of the organization, you can apply for our fiscal sponsorship program. And fiscal sponsorship, if no one out there knows anything about it, it's really a grassroots approach to raising money for your project. And so content and theme has not been something that we look at. Our fiscal sponsorship, I do see filmmakers still raising money from foundations, and I think some foundations, the political climate ebbs and flows, we hope, at least we hope, and I think foundations who are steadfast in the future, they'll look like they're very committed to what they, said they're committed to. So I think that that's one thing that we'll see. And the other thing I think with fiscal sponsorship, a lot of the funding that's coming in, like I said, it's through foundations, but also individuals who are passionate about that subject matter. And I think even more so now, there are certain maybe politically sensitive, maybe even controversial subject matters that some people are still funding. We have a project now that's raised about $800,000. We have projects that up to $1 million. So their money is coming in. I've seen people write checks for $100,000 to a project. So it is a different way to raise money, and I think that if you have a project and you're passionate about it, you can find an audience that's, supporting it. I mean, crowdfunding also is still another way. People are doing community outreach, just so many ways that, and they can bring that funding can go through fiscal sponsorship. I think a lot of people don't know that in-kind donations can go through fiscal sponsorship, so camera rental, all these things, if you find a camera company that wants to donate those resources to you. And we've even had stocks go through fiscal sponsorship. So I see fiscal sponsorship as even expanding now as a way to go against the norm in terms of raising money for independent filmmaking.
I completely agree, which is kind of why I look at that as potentially low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, if nothing else, it could give me some seed money, right, to finish development, right? And like on this one particular project, hire a writer, Like I don't have a script yet. I've got an idea, which is a great idea, but of course you can't protect an idea. I need to protect a story, so I need a writer, right? And I'd like to lock somebody in, and I'm looking at foundation money to do that. Anyway, we'll come back to that too. Aaron, I want to ask you, because your life is so much on the business end of film, not to mean that you're not creative in the way you work, but it's so much on the business side. And one thing I have noticed is that, in years past, you could get a single picture financing done, like a structured finance deal with a bank, a lender, private equity desk, on a single picture, and not a problem, right? They were willing to kind of, again, throw pasta at the wall, see if it works, take some chances. I'm seeing that single picture financing deals are becoming more and more rare, while those people that are writing the checks want to see more risk diversification, bigger ROI. They want to spread the risk around so that if any one particular project loses its shirt, right, there's the potential for a horror film to make it up on the back end, right? So they're looking for slate deals, and I'm wondering, I mean, that's what I'm seeing, right? But I'm out there asking for money. I want you to talk a little bit about what you're seeing from the inside.
I think that's very right. I think independent filmmaking is largely funded by private wealth, but not private equity so much on a single film idea. For instance, the way that private equity will largely work these days, at least, especially with the advent of AI, as these algorithms are really dialed in, there's a way to manufacture a bottom line, to manufacture money. And it's not by taking a leap of faith on a story that you love or a cause that you love. So private equity sort of sits out unless there is a diversification and opportunity for multiple revenue streams. There is a proven track record. For instance, Blackstone recently purchased a roll-up of a number of film production companies that included, I forget the name, it was Reese Witherspoon's company, Hello Sunshine, yeah. But that was, it was a huge private equity investment. But it's that sort of roll-up where they're purchasing intellectual property and they're purchasing storied companies and they're purchasing a lot of them altogether. And they're helping them grow and fund, but they're looking to flip them, right? They're looking to have them, grow in whatever manner they need to, and then sell them off one by one and turn a profit. VCs are a little bit less risk averse. They're willing to take a little bit more of a leap, and can come from all manner of family fund or private wealth or whatever it is. VC company, they're also doing the same thing. They're looking at intellectual property. They're looking at a long ball that has assets that can either be licensed for other things, or again, a roll-up of a storied or experienced film production company that has films, that has a catalog. The one-off film where you build your deck and you tell someone, how many theaters you're going to be in and how many tickets you can sell and how much money you're going to make, and you hand that around and cross your fingers, is still a workable medium, but it's not a private equity firm or a VC is not going to take that and cut a check.
But you still need to do it, right?
For sure.
So we all still, as producers, we all still do that. And in fact, if you ever took my class, that's your final work product for your grade. Because you do have to have a business plan, right? But I am, it's funny because we touched on celebrity for a second there and we're talking about Reese. I do feel like there has been a little bit of a shift, right? Where people, you want to get their attention? Attract a celebrity, right? Or somehow attach a celebrity. But if you're Mr. Front Porch and you've never done this before, how do you do that? And that really moves the needle, I think. I mean, for instance, I've got a project right now that the one without the script, that it's a great story. It's about this extraordinary guy. He's extraordinary. And a lot of people don't know who he is yet. But you know what? Nobody knew who the guy in My Left Foot was, right? Until Daniel Day-Lewis played him and got an Oscar for it, right? And nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, because Stephen Hawking was a little bit more famous. But The Theory of Everything, I mean, Eddie Redmayne got an Oscar for playing him. And these were movies, these were stories, extraordinary stories that what got made because of the people that were attached to them, right? And I don't have that yet. I don't even have a script yet, right? So I'm like, okay, well, what's the life of this? And let's almost use this as a case study, right? So I'm locking in the rights right now. We'll get a script. And then I think the next order of business, and while that's happening, I'm going to try to get a fiscal sponsor and raise some seed money, right? Can't decide where we're going to film it yet because we don't have a script, but I do want to attract somebody to the role because it could be an Eddie Redmayne or Daniel Day-Lewis type of thing. And I'm hoping that would get somebody's attention. And I'm guessing that all of you would agree with me that if I was successful in getting someone interested in a part like that, people are going to take the phone call, right? I mean,
Yes.
excuse me. So how do we get people to, let's say we don't have celebrity. How do we get people to pay attention to us? How do we get them to, how do we pique their interest in financing?
I think it's by original stories, really. Because, and a lot of films I've made, been with people, like first-time filmmakers, with completely unknown actors. The first film I did was called In the Company of Men, and there was this actor playing, for the lead role, and he was a friend of the director's, and the director just said, look, he's the right guy for it. And so we went and we made the film with good actors, and it was this unknown guy who could not get a job called Aaron Eckhart. And I mean, and then he blew up afterwards. So I think you've got to kind of you try and just get the best actors possible, particularly when it is a small, low-budget film. You don't really have a choice because you can just, if you're always running around trying to get the biggest actor possible, you're going to waste a lot of time and energy. So, I think finding good actors, we did it with Teeth, Jess Weixler, she'd never done a film before, and then she did this film. A lot of people wouldn't look at it because of the subject matter. A lot of actors wanted nothing to do with it. And then she got, the Grand Jury Prize for, her for acting. So, I mean, it can that's what's exciting about doing small independent films. It's having that liberty.
So, I mean, look at films like Moonlight and Parasite, right? I mean,
Yep.
great stories, right? And they were, I don't even know the extent to which anybody had any celebrity quotient to the fundraising process in those. I have no idea, but I do think that access to funding, like access for creators that are new to this, right? Like, people are going to take your call. You made a lot of movies, they're going to take your call. All of us, right? They're not going to ignore us. But if you're a creator that actually has no experience, and this is your first time out, how do you fix that? How do you get in the door? How do you get someone to return your phone call? Ideas?
Persistence?
Hustle.
Yeah, I have an indie film I've been trying to make, and I think it is, my mantra recently is, where there's a will, there's a way. And I keep saying that, and I think I have been able to tap into some of the, not the A celebrity, but by going through casting directors, just going to events like this, talking to someone who might know someone else, looking at the credits, seeing if there's a producer or someone there that you may know or someone may know. I mean, it's just connecting the dots.
Well, this is why I actually put a lot of weight on relationships with fiscal sponsors, right? Because even for narrative features, right, which you probably wouldn't necessarily consider, oh, I should raise some not-for-profit funds too to mix them with my for-profit funds. But I don't know, I think that it carries some weight when you say, I've got NIWIF behind this movie. I mean, they're fiscally sponsoring me, or the Gotham, or Film Independent, right? And these are organizations that the industry knows about, right? And so, they don't make that decision lightly. And I think that has some currency to it, right?
It's definitely, I mean, when someone's writing a check for $100,000, just a filmmaker who has never made a project before, they want to make sure that money is actually going to that film. And having NIWIF as a fiscal sponsor definitely says, this money is going to be used for that purpose.
Doris, let me ask you, for today, when you're looking at the movies that you want to do today, walk me through, like, what's the process when it comes to the fundraising aspect of it?
Well, there are two films that I care about right now, and neither script is done either. But when I think about the experiences I've had in because I've sold films, I've made my own film, but I haven't really raised money the way you guys have at that same level. I'm like a baby producer. But a lot of the times when I've been a kind of executive producer or a consulting producer or whatever, what I see is people just reaching out to everyone they know, talking about their film, talking and doing the things you're talking about. Is there a connection? Is it, I think it was Sally Field in one instance where, her son, I believe this was the right actor, it could be different, was gay, and she cared a lot about, she a real advocate for LGBTQ things. The story was on this. So you can get to people through their interests, through their passions, what they care about. The same thing with financiers, right? So if you're making a movie about a cancer story, then you can find out both on the actor side and the cast, the above the line aspect of it, and for film fundraising, who might care about this. And so when you're looking at your network and talking to your network, you're talking about who might care about this particular thing, right? So that's another way that I've already started conversations with people.
Let me actually, and let's talk about the foundation thing for a second, because, when I'm talking about grants, foundation grants, right? 50,000, 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, this is great. 200,000, I mean, this is all great. There is something out there called a program-related investment that a lot of foundations, not all of them, but a lot of them will do. And it requires whatever the story is that you're telling or want to tell, it has to be directly in line with their mission, their vision, and speak to the entirety of why they exist in the first place. So for instance, if you went to the Ford Foundation, and I'm just using this as an example, so don't go to the Ford Foundation and say, John said that I can get this money from you. But let's say this year, the Ford Foundation says, you know what, let's support children's education. Let's do that. Let's make a concerted effort to put a lot of our dollars into children's education. And you have a narrative feature where the canon throughout the whole film is about educating our youth. You're directly in line. You are aligned perfectly programmatically with what the Ford Foundation may be trying to achieve that year. So you could go to the Ford Foundation and say, I'm making this movie that has an educational element to it, and I'd like a grant. And they may turn around and say, okay, we'll give you $50,000 because you're focused on education and that's part of our programming this year. But you could say, but I want a program-related investment. I want bigger. I want $400,000. Or I want $500,000. They may say, oh, you know what? Okay, because what you're doing could be considered programmatically directly in line with what we want to do. We're not just going to give you $500,000, but what we might do is give you a no interest or a low interest or a no recourse loan for $500,000. We hope that the movie gets released and we hope that it makes money, and if it does make money, we get paid back with some nominal interest component or maybe not. If you do pay us back, we can take that money and roll it forward into someone else's project that has the same components to it. But if it's a non-recourse loan, you don't have to pay it back. They still hope you do, but you're not going to get sued. They're not going to make you file bankruptcy. There's no recourse on the loan. And so program-related investments are actually structured finance vehicles that are a lot bigger than these small chunks of cash that we're talking about.
John is giving you a lot of little pearls of wisdom here. I mean, partly on the other side of it, when I was we're trying to sell A Most Beautiful Thing, I kept talking to buyers whom I knew from my experience being a buyer, and they'd say, "Well, we don't have a budget for this type of film, or we don't have a budget for that." And I said to the filmmaker, I said, we need a bigger play here, because this movie is such an incredible story about Chicago and about these young men. And what we should do is try to speak to the corporate social responsibility groups. And that is exactly what happened. Well, we ended up selling it quite unusually, non-exclusively to Amazon and Peacock. Usually these buys, first time on TV, are absolutely always exclusive. But we were able to get in touch with the corporate social responsibility people at NBC Universal. And I had already spoken to the buyer, so we knew the buyer liked the movie. And she said, I don't have the money. And I said, well, what if we speak to your corporate social responsibility people? And they loved it. It aligned exactly with what they said they wanted to do. Pillars and communities, the power of nature and water, the power of sport to help young people in these communities, and that's where the money came from. So it wasn't a traditional purchase. It wasn't a traditional license. It went through Peacock, but it was financed by a completely other separate division, because we found a creative way to say, this is actually works for you, and it is your programming. It is the thing you wanted to accomplish, because they are like a foundation. They were so big. Now I'm not, all of these departments have been cut, but you know what I'm saying. Like it's analogous to what you're talking about.
It's funny because and this conversation really is about, how financing really does drive the creative narrative a little bit. And I remember working on a movie one time where we really thought that we were going to qualify for some soft money, some government money outside the United States. And we screwed it up because we had the composer had the wrong nationality. Composer was not a member of the EU or the EEC. And we had already spent $300,000, I think, in having this movie scored. And there was if we had done something a little differently, if we had a different composer, we would have passed this cultural test and we would have gotten millions of dollars back in soft money. And so we made the business decision to spend another $100,000, scrap the first score, have it rescored with the right person of the right nationality, and we spent $100,000 more to get millions, right? And that's
So it worked.
it worked. Yeah, I mean, then that's but it kind of works the same way when you're making a film and you run out of money, right? It's like or you've got a $3 million budget, but you're only able to raise $1.5 million. Okay, well, show me how to make this movie for $1.5 million, right? And we've all had to do it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You always find a way, but you have to make sure that the story can be adapted to the lower budget level, or it's, you've got to rewrite the script, or, maybe scrap some locations or whatever, but you can't make exactly the same film for the original amount of money. You just can't.
And I always tell
So-
film students to think like producers, filmmakers to think like producers. I'll have students give me a script and I'll say, well, you could shoot this anywhere. And she'll say, no, I want to shoot it in New York. I'm like, it's a hospital room. Like, no, I don't think so, right? I don't know. So, yeah.
So
That's how these things all
yeah.
chicken and egg.
I mean, listen, for the last 12 years, I've been professionally helping people with their production planning, right? And telling them, why they shouldn't do it there. They should think about this place and that place. And when they look at me like with crossed eyes and they're like, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm like, listen, honey, I made Texas Rangers in Alberta and Gangs of New York in Rome and Chicago in Toronto. Don't talk to me about, success stories. How about tell me some success stories of people that that thought outside the box, that just like hammered it.
Well, one film that I helped take to Sundance in 2005 is a good success story because it was Stephen Blush and Paul Rackman as a writer and director, and it's called American Hardcore, and it's the history of punk rock and hardcore music from 1986 forward, and it was a book written by Stephen Blush, but it was something that it was exciting, it was unique, it had teeth. These people are still alive, they can be interviewed, they can play in Sundance for your opening party. We had an amazing and wild ride making that film, and a lot of it was just us in a pickup truck running around the Northeast or sometimes on the West Coast, depending on who we were talking to and interviewing. But the stories we were getting are legendary, and therefore, I guess it's more of an interview sort of format. But there's a script, and it's copywritten, and so is the book, of course. And there's just an enormous amount of attention that gathered. And it went to Sundance and was bought. It was successful. And now I think it's on Netflix, and it's been 20 years, which is wild to think about. But that costs nothing. Like these guys were like, yeah, man, rock and roll. Well, you can interview us. You know, there was a few that were so punk that they were like, no fucking way I want to be on a movie. Excuse my French, but, but you know that it was peanuts to make, and because these guys were excited to put their stories out there and to tell the story, and you know, the cost and gas and the camera and, you know, a little bit of creativity and lots of coffee. And it really made money and was able to fund future projects because of it.
Easmanie, let me ask you, because I'm a member of NIWIFT. I didn't know if you knew that. So I'm getting all the emails, right, of like, come, you know, congratulations to our NIWIFT members that have films in the festival and or in competition or come to the screenings and all that stuff. I'm wondering from your desk, what you've seen, any big surprises, any projects where you're like, wow, this is so great that we have our name attached to this, that we helped them get this movie made?
Well, I think there's an upcoming project. It's based on Olivia Records, and it's a documentary. And they have gathered such a great community around them. They've already raised about $1 million, and I can see them raising another 500 to $1 million, the way that they're getting. And I do think the subject matter has been driving everyone to donate to their project. They just have a really amazing business plan, and I foresee them at Sundance at some point. Yeah.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
It's funny, as we're sitting here and we're talking, and you know, Doris and I were talking earlier in the room, you were talking about your project, right, with this incredibly complex character that there are so many boxes that they might not get checked, right, because of all these really challenging issues. And I'm like, okay, can you imagine the pitch meeting for Precious, right? Like, can you imagine, right? And that, such a powerful story, and it got made, you know? And just like the Broadway show, that got a lot of accolades about the guy who was an usher and now I'm totally forgetting the name of the show, but it was a real challenge for this black, overweight, gay usher. Yeah, yeah, it was great, right? And I'm sure that, you know, Broadway investors were kind of thinking the same thing, like who's going to want to go see this? And yet, it was a really compelling story.
It's going to drive me crazy.
I know. I'm sorry about that.
That I can't remember the title.
I'm sorry.